It's a miracle! Something other than COVID muscled its way onto the national agenda this week, and all it took was the apocalypse being brought forward by a decade.
It is a disturbing read.
New study by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
A dire message from climate scientists.
Even more serious and frequent natural disasters are expected to wreak havoc on humanity.
Massive wake-up call to governments to cut emissions.
Seeing the two stories side by side in the news cycle brought home a crushing reality that however bad we think COVID is, the ravages of climate change will be much, much worse. Despite that, the political response was more of the same. First, the PM got on the front foot with a clear message, which wasn't us.
We cannot ignore the fact that the developing world accounts for 2/3 of global emissions, and those emissions are rising. That is a stark fact.
Furthermore, we are doing great.
Australia has reduced emissions by 20% on 2005. We have met and we have beaten our Kyoto targets, Mr Speaker. We will meet and we will beat our Paris commitments, Mr Speaker, for 2030.
The Deputy PM and Leader of the Nationals went even further, as he tends to do, refusing to indulge any meaningful talk of targets, refusing even to engage with the concept of targets.
We do not say, well, we've heard the report and we've decided that what we're going to do is actions A, B, C and D, and they'll say, what did you base that on? So we just thought it up because we're politicians.
If it sounds like an off-the-cuff deflection, it's not. Here's what Barnaby said last month.
Do you want lunch? Well, I'm quite happy to consider the menu when you tell me what's on it and what it costs. Tell me how we do it.
Fair bit to unpack there, starting with the fact that on the face of it, this is completely bonkers. Here is the Deputy Prime Minister, the second most senior policymaker in the country, asking to be told what the relevant policy is before he can agree to it. He's demanding to see the menu, but he's apparently forgotten he runs the restaurant.
Sautéed gherkins and sashimi tadpoles.
No thanks. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before, and I can't imagine it happening in any other policy area. Like, imagine in the lead up to the budget, someone asking the Treasurer, are we going to be in deficit? And the Treasurer saying, well, that's a stupid question. You tell me what our tax policies are and then I'll tell you about the budget. But I guess that's the point. This isn't any other policy area. Climate's become an issue of near irreconcilable difference within the coalition. So when Barnaby Joyce says...
You tell me how we do it.
He's not actually talking to us. He's negotiating with the PM. Barnaby's saying, oh, you want a net zero policy, ScoMo? You're going to have to buy our support. So that will probably mean something like paying farmers to reduce emissions. Now, for Nats with long memories, this is actually payback. It goes back to John Howard, who reduced the rights of farmers to clear their land. That saved trees, which then counted as carbon credits under the Kyoto Protocol. And Australia could then use those credits to offset increased emissions in other industries. So basically, farmers paid the bill for other industries' emissions. Now, it's their turn to invoice.
I'm an accountant.
Chilling. Thing is, it might just work. This week, Morrison told Parliament that his cabinet was currently developing a post-2030 emissions policy, and whatever commitments arise will have the costs detailed. So, advantage Joyce. Scott Morrison has to face the world at a meeting in Glasgow this November, and if he wants to strike a deal on net zero targets at all, that would be a good time for two reasons. Firstly, because a target isn't just an empty aspiration.
Commitments without plans is a danger, Mr Speaker.
Plans do matter more than commitments, but really both are necessary. You need the sat-nav and the car, and ideally a spare tyre. But I digress.
Our government is not going to write a blank cheque on this. We're not going to write a blank cheque.
The problem is someone else might, and that's the second point. An invoice for the cost of emissions reduction is coming our way, whether we like it or not. This could take several forms, but one of the most significant will likely be other countries hitting us with carbon tariffs. So that basically means that countries will start taxing goods at their border based on the carbon emissions involved in producing them. Think about that. That's taxes on things like coal, iron ore, meat, dairy, all the things that hit the Nats right where it hurts, in the heartland. So Scott Morrison can spruik
technology, not taxes,
all he wants. But if this happens, we get the worst possible scenario. We pay the tax and we don't even get to keep the revenue. That's the abiding irony of this situation. While our own internally divided government is jostling over the costs of any climate policy, those costs might well be imposed by other nations, and soon. And then, having run this pantomime argument that it's for others to tell him what his policy is, the international community might just do exactly that. They'll tell Barnaby what's on the menu and even outline the costs for him. But at that point, he'll be in no position to haggle. He'll just have to pay the bill. In fact, we all will.
With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.